So in a market, we're going to call a market is really that set of buyers, of customers, of users in a market, and the kind of forces that cause them to either accept innovation or not accept innovation. We're going to talk a little bit about adoption costs. We're going to talk about definitions of performance. What does performance mean and how do people seek it? And also going to talk about disruption. And draw a little bit on the work of Clay Christensen in his work, The Innovator's Dilemma, to talk about how disruptive technologies come in and turn a market on its head before you know it. In the end, we're interested in adoption, right? So if we could say, well, if I could predict what kind of curve it is that adoption is going to take place in my industry, and so we'd like to think about what drives adoption. How is it that adoption happens? Because if I have an innovation and I want to adopt it in the world, then I want to understand these things. The kind of market constraints we're going to talk about sort of are based around this basic idea that everyone wants it cheaper and faster and better. And that's really a hard thing to do. They're going to want higher performance at a lower price. So generally when we go to buy something, a new thing, if I'm going to replace my computer, I'm expecting it to be, if not at the same price, at a lower price, and certainly performing a lot better than it did before. I'm also going to have legacy systems, adoption costs, and so when I decide to to bring a new innovation into my life, adopt, I have to think about what's it going to cost me to change? Or what's it going to cost me to use this new way of doing it versus the old way? And then we're going to talk about general economic conditions. So the general economic conditions, if there's lots of money around, then I can buy my iPhone 5, my iPhone 6, and my iPhone 7. However, if there's not a lot of money around, that is, the general economic conditions are tight, I'm less likely to engage in adoption of new innovations. So the basic dilemma, as I see it, is that markets want change. Right? They want decreased costs, they want increased performance, the kind of things I just talked about. At the same time, they want everything to stay the same. I have a legacy system I want to keep fit with. I don't want any costs or substitution. I want no risk. I don't want any risks. I want to know how it's going to perform. I want to be able to say, okay, what is the standard performance measure of this new adoption that you're offering me? Think of legacy systems this way. If you have a Macintosh computer, an Apple Macintosh, you're going to buy Apple software. If someone came to you and said, hey, I have this great PC, right, a Windows PC, for you, you'd have to say, well, that's going to be pretty hard change to make because I have all this software, I have all this hardware, I may have cameras, I may have all kinds of things that hook up to this device, and switching to the other device makes it problematic. Same with electric cars. Where do I charge them? How do what are the adoption costs? If I buy one of these things, what do I have to do to my house in order to be able to charge it at home? And if I can charge it at home, can I charge it at work? What are the costs to that? And so these are the kind of things that we often may not think of. What is it that a person has to give up in order to come along with you with your innovation? There's also substitutes. And so in markets, we see there's one way of doing things, and eventually people substitute. There's something else comes in to take the place of what came before. So once we always used horses, and then we started using cars. It was like there was a substitution there. Well, substitution can happen as it's driven by market needs. So as the market needs change, as people, their need for transportation may change because they're going longer distances or because they're able to go longer distances, and so that it means a car may be better than a horse. The evolving standards for performance, what people come to expect as a sort of a basic level of performance and versus high performance, and also in industries where there's very low rates of performance increase, that something different can come in, a different way of doing it can come in, and that will get people willing to substitute a new way for an old. Now I want to talk about some radical disruptions, some ways when there's radical substitution, the kind of disruption that happens, and what is it, the pattern that happens here that we can begin to predict when will substitution happen. So for example, here's a VAX 780 computer. Actually it's a copy of a VAX 780 computer. And there was a time when this company, Digital Equipment Corporation, was the king. They had this super fast alpha processor, and they were convinced that anything else is just a toy. People will only ever buy PCs for games. And in the early, late 70s, these computers were coming on the scene, the Apple II and sort of some hobbyist computers, and the CEO of Digital Equipment Corporation says basically, there's no reason for anyone to have a computer in his home. If they do that, they're crazy because we are the king. So what Digital did was really stay focused on the high end of the computer market. And then what they did was they tended to ignore the low end of the computer market where some interesting things happened. So one thing is that the low level, the hobbyist computer became very competitive because there were a number of companies in there trying to satisfy that need. They're competing with each other. And so very quickly we saw through competition, like we just talked about earlier, competition, that these things got better and they began to push up market. And so the processor, if I have an 8086 and someone has an 8286 and 8386 and Motorola and Intel, all these companies are competing, they're actually pushing up the performance of these processors. And so take that and put it together with networking and put that together with some killer applications, namely VisiCalc, which you can call Excel, WordPerfect, and email, and then you have a killer product. And these things actually displace, completely kill what we call them the mini computer market. Companies like Wang, Digital Equipment Corporation, Apollo, these were all these mini computer companies, and they did not pay attention to these low-end computers until the low-end computers came up through the bottom of their industry. Another one, big steel. There was a time when the integrated steel mills were it. So there's some of these mills were as big as a city, as a small city. There's totally vertically integrated. They were focused on the high end of steel. After World War II, there was lots of market value in these things because they were able to produce this super high quality steel. Well, some small mills came in, and mills, the companies Nucor, companies like Chaparral, and they were entered into the recycling market. They did it a different way. So basically what they were doing is they're taking old steel and recycling it into new things. And early in the process wasn't super high quality, and so they made this stuff called rebar. Rebar is the pieces of metal. If you've ever seen them put together a cement building or something, there's these pieces of metal that they embed inside the cement. Very, very low-end steel use. It can be a low quality of steel because it's really just being embedded inside of a system. They over-engineer it. It's 10 times stronger than it has to be, and so you can do this. And so those companies are working there with a significant cost advantage because I could do a small mini mill, one of these mini mills, at about 10% of the startup costs, basically 10% of the startup costs, and my production costs are lower also, 15% lower production costs. And in steel mills, you can imagine that production costs are a big deal, right? That's all this energy use. So with these two advantages, I start working on my rebar market. And then someone else enters my rebar market, so it starts getting a little bit competitive. So I try to make my steel a little bit better, right? So I'm still making rebar, but now I'm making a little bit better. And then they make theirs better, then I make mine better. And so at the bottom of the market, because we're getting really crowded, and so we begin to push up market. So pretty soon we're making the same quality steel as the big mills, but now with these advantages. Again, with 10% of the startup cost and 15% of the 15% production cost advantage. That's a big deal. And so basically, Bethlehem Steel, a big, gigantic steel plant in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. I believe it's now a casino. It certainly is not making steel. Retailing, same thing in retailing happened. There was a time where there were these variety stores, Sears, Macy's, Woolworth, Kresge. They had high quality of service and a great deal of variety. And what they did was they charged high gross margins. So each product, the part they added on top was for a fairly significant amount. Then what happened? Well, these discount retailers came in. They had lower gross margins, so they made less money on each item, but they sold so many of them that they made up the difference. So some of these companies, Woolworth tried this company called Woolco, and that one failed. Kresge created Kmart, but Kmart ended up killing Kresge because it was a much more efficient way of doing it. And now we see sort of the killer whales of these of retailing are your Targets and your Walmarts. And they're the ones who really made this model work in a big way, basically displacing all the old model, which was the high service quality, high gross margins. The traditional brokerage industry, there was a time when you had a stockbroker. That was a person you went to and said, hey, I'd like to buy that stock, or I'd like to buy that stock. And again, that is gone because we have these discount trading houses now. And you go online, you go online trading. This was driven by low cost structure, right? Because now I have the network and I have those things that I'm able to do it. I don't want to pay a person to do these trades for me. And also new demographic trends, new kinds of people who are buying stocks and trading stocks who had never done it before in the past, who wouldn't feel comfortable going into a stock brokerage and talking to a person there. One more place this happens is the music industry. So let's talk about the story of the music industry. The music industry had a great business model. The business model was to buy one song you like, you had to get 12 songs you didn't like, right? So you had 12 songs on a CD and you liked the one, you had to buy them all. You couldn't buy just the one. And so what happened was some people at the lower end of the market didn't want to do that. You had here Sean Fanning who'd rather not buy CDs, right? He wanted to buy individual records and he wanted to listen to music in a different way. And buying a CD was not conducive to that. CDs were expensive, they were about $20, and so it was not working. What Sean Fanning did was he began to digitize music and allowed people a way to share music. And so instead of the old model where you had to buy 12 songs you hate, 12 songs you hate to get one song you like, he said, buy every song, you get every song you want for free. His proposition created a massive change in how people thought about purchasing music and also how people consume music. It became much more oriented around singles than it did around albums. And so instead of getting $20 for a CD, companies were now only getting 99 cents, 33 cents of which went to Apple to buy singles on iTunes. So in all these publishing industries, this happened in books, magazines, music, video, software. The problem for them was the new technology, the disruptive technology that came in made it possible to have cost-free copies. You could make a copy for free. The laws were essentially unenforceable. You can't go into people's computers and look at what's in there, and there were low barriers to entry. So remember, there are 2 college kids who wrote this program instead of having the entire record industry. Now, the record industry, the music industry could have done it. Certainly if 2 teenagers could do it, a record industry could do it, but they didn't, and why not? And these are kind of dynamics we've been talking about this week at the industry level.